Chair, Mr. Alger, Mr. Murphy, very welcome. Thank you for coming in. Just at the outset, I got a marketing call sometime a few months ago in relation to the National Lottery. That wasn't anything to do with you guys, was it?
Yes, I suspect it was. I don't know because I'm not aware. But sorry, I'm not aware of who our market research agents contact and don't contact. However, we carry out constant market research, as you can imagine, to see how it is.
I might just help you. So it was myself, I think, the chair, I think.
Three members of the committee.
Members of the committee were contacted.
Alan Dillon.
So
a few weeks ago.
No, I think it was more, Chair. It was maybe 2 months ago, but it was certainly this term in the period around the publication of the report. Yeah.
Between so once a year, the PLI has carried out market research among good causes, retailers, and the political and politicians, so as to establish what the perception of the National Lottery is. And so, as I say, we've done that for 3 years. We started the process, I think, in October of this year, and it lasted a month. We're not aware of who is contacted, but we do get anonymised answers.
I'm sorry to cut across you. I don't mean to be impolite. Our time is so tight. From our perspective, the report was issued. 3 members of the Public Accounts Committee were contacted. We raised it with the regulator 2 weeks ago. So I think you have been on notice that we will ask the question, and we are curious about the source of it. But we've other things to discuss. But it was a source of concern to us that we would be contacted in what seemed like a.
And when we saw that, we'd initiated that research sometime before then.
So did you check, between the last 2 weeks since this came up, the PAC 2 weeks ago, have you checked with your market research company? Did they do that?
Well, they won't tell me who they spoke to, and that's right. Okay. But I do suspect it is them. As it happens, we rang them when we saw that come up in the session with the regulator and asked them to stop because it was causing concern. Sure. And they had in fact already finished.
Okay. In relation to the purpose of this report is, increased transparency, and you're here to get your view in relation to that in foot of the CNAG's report. The 98%, 2% advertising top-up is a source of real concern to us for a couple of reasons. It piques our interest as much as, and it's of real concern. One, I think it's fair to say the committee feels there's a sharpness to it. 2, we feel it wouldn't have been apparent to players at the National Lottery without the CNAG's report. And 3, we want to understand the proportion of advertising that is being used from top-up funds versus other advertising and how that works overall. On an annualised basis, it looked like 17 million of the top of the fund, the unclaimed prize money fund, which is unclaimed prize money. 17 million of that is being used for advertising. 350,000 being used for top-ups. So it piques our interest generally in relation to advertising, not just that fund of money. Did you? What's the justification for using over 98% of that in that way? What's your justification internally?
So it falls to us to make the decision, and we make the decision based on what is the optimal use of that money in order to sustain the National Lottery and grow the amount that goes to good causes, and as a result, all of the other stakeholders.
So it was essentially that was the best commercial decision that you could make, having regard to all of the different things that you do.
That is correct.
Okay, so that's why the rest of advertising becomes so interesting to us, because we wonder, why do you need to rely on that unclaimed prize money to the extent that you have been relying on it? Is it what, and how does that relate to the rest of your advertising spend? We see very considerable advertising, and so but yet the marketing information, and actually I might just check with the CNAG. It's not apparent to us from the accounts how much is being spent on advertising, and you say it's commercially sensitive. But from the CNAG's perspective, was it apparent to you, or did you have from the Premier Lottery accounts, or did you have to rely on the information coming through the regulator? Could I just ask CNAG his?
Well, the only information we had was from the regulator. Obviously, the company publishes their own financial statements, but we didn't rely on that, I think.
Advertising is of very considerable interest to the Oireachtas in gambling at the moment because of the gambling legislation, of which you'll be familiar. And indeed, I have to take the opportunity to correct the record. I received correspondence from you this morning, of course. We were speaking on the gambling bill. I might just use this opportunity, Chair. I was speaking on the gambling bill on Tuesday, I believe, in the Dáil at second stage, and we've talked about how I was noticing advertising since our engagement with the National Lottery regulator, and I had said how I'd seen this Christmas millionaire ad, where somebody is having difficulty passing over an envelope, and I'd seen it during the toy show. And that was in error because, of course, it wasn't during the toy show, and because helpfully Premier Lotteries sent me all of the advertising detail to show that it wasn't during the toy show, but I'd like to explain why I thought it was. I had recorded the toy show, and I was watching the toy show with my 7-year-old son at, say, 6 o'clock on Sunday evening, that kind of thing. So I was sitting with the child watching the recording of the toy show. We turned it off because it was boring, and we decided to watch the soccer instead. It was during the soccer, as we sat watching the soccer, in a child TV time in the evening, that I saw it again and again and again. And that's where I made the mistake, and I'm happy to correct the record. But the point was, I was watching the show, and very helpfully, and actually for the benefit of the committee, the National Lottery wrote to me, and I can put it on the record to the committee because I think it is important, that of course there's a spreadsheet of advertisements for the show and indeed the repeats, but we take our commitments on responsible advertising very seriously. And that they have, not Premier Lotteries, was the first time I learned of it, but why would I, an advertising code of practice that they have in place with the regulator of the National Lottery, and indeed, and in fairness to you, directed RTE not to not to use those ads during the toy show, to make sure that you were in compliance with the with your own advertising code with the regulator. The difficulty for my and the mistake that I made was I hadn't considered it responsible advertising while I was watching it there with the child, and that's the mistake that I made. But so there's so many different things going on with advertising in the Oireachtas, and that's the focus, and that's why you're getting asked all of these different questions in relation to it. Obviously, marketing is a key piece of your work. Can you, because of all of these concerns, can you set out to the committee there's somewhat of the proportions from the 17 million that's used on an annual basis versus the funds from your own resources, your own base marketing resources? Is 17 million, can you set out some proportion within your commercially sensitive concerns?
Thank you for the question. I am unable to provide information as to the marketing spend that we employ because it is commercially sensitive, as it is commercially sensitive for any organisation in a commercial field. Fair
enough. So it's up to us then as legislators to make sure that that changes, because I have a concern about the scale of advertising in gambling. We had the gambling industry in front of us in the Oireachtas Justice Committee on a whole range of these different points also. It is by no means National Lottery exclusive. But we do need to know what the spend is, what the distribution of that spend is, and how it relates to other things. Can I move on to player welfare? So I appreciate you can't answer it, it's commercially sensitive, and I totally respect that, by the way, with commercial organisations. But we have a different set of difficulties as legislators. In relation to player welfare, can I ask you how many people work in Premier Lotteries, approximately?
Approximately 220.
220. And I know that you couldn't provide a cost to Deputy Murphy in relation to the spend on player welfare, but how many people are dedicated exclusively to that? And I appreciate that there's lots of people doing it in lots of different ways, but are there any people designated exclusively to it?
So as you say, there are many people involved in that. Everybody who creates a product or creates a website or an app or an advertising campaign is expert in how it is that player protection applies to their part of the business, not least because we have to be under the terms of both the licence and the various codes of practice. As regards people who interact with players, might that be a way of narrowing it down?
Let me give you an example. When the other parts of the gambling industry were in the Justice Committee, we asked the same question, say, of Flutter, and they were able to tell us the figures across. Now, they use United Kingdom figures, but they provided subsequently to the Justice Committee a subset of that were dedicated to player welfare concerns within Flutter and what they did and what proportion. So they had a team dedicated, now not in a sufficient way as far as we were concerned, but they had a team identified specifically to that. So there must be a team involved, for example, in notifications of any difficulties with the licence to the regulator. You did say yourself it was the first of your 5 steps that was taken. So
the
there's
first
obviously
thing we do is tell the regulator.
So is that a regulatory person who does that?
Yeah.
Okay. So with the player welfare side, I think it was the 48 people who were contacted subsequent to their self-exclusion. Are there people dedicated within the National Lottery to helping or managing that? And I appreciate you don't want to trigger them, as the regulator contact said, in any way. But who's dedicated to the follow-up of that? The finding the system error, fixing it, making contact with gambling support groups. What's that? What do you do there?
So the senior leadership team meets whenever there's a material incident or an incident that may turn to be material. So that's the 8 most senior people in the organisation, including Cian and I. And we work out, we go through those 5 steps. The amount of resource necessary to address the issue it's impossible to tell at the beginning. It depends on, as we go into it. But in the end, with the lottery, most things are implemented through technology change. So it will involve, weeks, if not months of work, and multiple suppliers, as well as project managers, QAs, test people. That's the nature of our lottery.
I appreciate you can't talk about communications with the regulator, but have you had to invoke that process within your own organisation, say in 2022?
We've certainly notified the regulator that there's an incident which might turn into a P1 or might turn into some...
So you have notified the regulator?
Of an incident, yeah, which could be that the... I'm trying to think of one. There was our retail terminals weren't working for some minutes one afternoon. The regulator would know, yeah.
Okay, but nothing of the nature that we were talking about with the regulator in relation to self-exclusions?
I'm not commenting on anything which might be perceived by the regulator to be a breach, yes or no.
Sure.
As you can imagine, that she would be surprised at my having a view
No,
of
but
that
see,
in
I'm not,
public.
I was more that notifications of things that she should notify. Of course, she has her own capacity to assess as well. From a commercial perspective, from a risk perspective, Mr. Algeo, and as my colleagues were asking earlier, I think Deputy Murphy, you were asking about the upper limit on a fine that might be issued or withholding of funds that might be issued by the regulator. From a commercial perspective, I don't know the answer to this. What is the upper limit of what the regulator can financially impose a withholding of? What was the phrase you used, Mr. McCarthy? Withholding funds. What's the upper limit of that? Is that
I believe it's 20 million euros in a year.
20 million euros in a year. And that presumably is something that you, as with the senior management team, build into your risk management in some way. The capacity to have that sort of funding withheld.
We work very hard to stay inside the licence and to be best in class at player protection. We don't make decisions based on the risk of the downside. We just attempt and have real ambition to stay inside the lines of the licence and to do everything we can for player protection.
I totally understand that. So just the question that I'm trying to get to, of course, is that, and this is more for the regulator, whom indeed we may have back, Deputy, there have been that we're aware of, she confirmed to us last time, no such fines, no such withholdings, I don't know what phrase to use, ever, in the terms, within the terms of the licence. So while the upper limit is 20 million, and you do work in the way that you do, and I understand why you do that, but there have been breaches, nothing has happened. There's probably no reason, I'm not being facetious, but there's probably no reason to bank in a risk, a 20 million fine into a risk profile in any way when the regulator has not appeared to want to use her power, even for a breach that I suppose we regarded as much more serious than potentially she regarded, because we would have thought that was something where withholding funds was appropriate. But these are questions, these are observations, Chair, I suppose. They're not fair questions to Mr. Algeo, but I think it goes back to our earlier dialogue with the regulator.
Okay, thanks for that. Do you want to just comment briefly on that? Are you okay? Just on that, on what Deputy McNeil has said.
We are very mindful of the considerable powers that the regulator has, right up to the point of rescinding the licence. And as a result, we put enormous resource into operating the National Lottery in a way which minimises the risk of licence breach. Unfortunately, from time to time, things do go wrong. We deeply regret that when that happens, and work through those 5 steps that I spoke about earlier to address them.